I saw my arm completely crushed, and I let off a horrific panic scream. It was like a horror film scream. I tied a tourniquet using an old t-shirt from the ute, and I kind of took lead on that because my adrenaline just went through the roof. So I was fueled by adrenaline, and I was focused and wired really for survival. Now, for those who don't know the Northern Territories, it's very different to the rest of Australia. It's the wild, wild west of the Australian Outback.
Welcome to Movao Live. My name is Rebecca Legon, and I'm excited to be joined today by Henry Dunn to discuss his inspiring journey following amputation. After COVID restrictions, Henry set out to travel the world, but his adventures took a tragic turn in the Australian Outback. While working as a station hand Jackaroo on a remote cattle farm, he suffered a severe accident when a hydraulic coach rammer crushed his arm, resulting in an amputation. Henry didn't let this trauma define him. Instead, he transformed his adversity into advocacy, becoming an adaptive athlete, competing in CrossFit and advocates for cold water therapy as part of his rehabilitation and recovery. I can't wait to delve deeper into his incredible story. Henry, hello, how are you doing?
Morning, Rebecca. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for joining me today.
It's good. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to dive deep into the conversation.
Yeah, so let's start at the beginning. You decided to pack your bags after the horrible restrictions of COVID, when we were all on lockdown for such a long time, and you ventured around the world, but unfortunately got involved in a tragic accident. Can you tell us all about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I was out on a year abroad, and as you've just said, on the back of COVID. So me and my girlfriend decided to get the first flight out to Thailand when they opened up their borders. Still with the uncertainty of which borders would open, we kind of decided to go to the countries that ended up opening as we travelled through Southeast Asia. So we started in Thailand, so 2 months in Thailand, a month in Vietnam, a month in Cambodia, a month in Bali, 2 months in New Zealand, and then did 5 weeks together on the east coast of Australia from Cairns all the way down to Sydney. We did deep sea diving, bungee jumps, skydives, motorbike loops in North Vietnam,
Wow.
camper van trips on the South Island of New Zealand. So we kind of did everything we possibly could because we were exploring the world, so why not?
And you've been kept indoors for so long as well.
Exactly.
Get out.
I know, yeah. So it wasn't, how we imagined our travels would go off the back of COVID, but we saw it as a positive. Now, at the end of that time, Becca, my girlfriend, we're still together to this day. We met when we were 16, I'm now 25. So we've, lived life throughout education, university, COVID, and the year of traveling, and then now the rehab journey, and I know our next steps. But she had to go home. Now, I didn't want to go home yet. I wasn't tied to come back to England. So I said, look, I want to stay out and I want to work, but I want to specifically work on a cattle station in Australia. Becca left, and I got a flight from Sydney up to Darwin to the Northern Territories. Now, for those who don't know the Northern Territories, it's very different to the rest of Australia. It's the wild, wild west of the Australian Outback, where the population is about 250,000 people in that whole space. Now, it's a huge mass of land. You've got the middle of it is Ayers Rock, and essentially you've got one road, the Stuart Highway, which runs down from Darwin all the way down to South Australia. 150,000 people live in this whole territory. It's like going back in the 60s. So flew up to Darwin, and I got a bus, the Greyhound bus, which for those who have travelled Australia or America, they're like classic backpacker buses, and you meet all kinds of people on those type of buses. I get dropped off in a small town called Larimer. Now, Larimer is famous for, I say, about 3 reasons. The first reason, that it's got one of the smallest populations in Australia, so it's one of the smallest towns with a population of about 11 people.
11
people, so it's very, very small. And the second reason it used to be 12 people, and there's a famous documentary on Netflix called Lost in Larimer about a guy who went missing with his dog Kelly, completely off the face of the earth, no trace of the dog or himself, and he was from Larimer. So
Oh my
those who are interested, give it a watch on Netflix. I didn't know that as I went down
God. Did
on
it
the
scare
bus.
you?
I think it opened my eyes up to how vast these areas are, and actually how a lot more people go missing in Australia than people realise. I believe there's a statistic across the whole of Australia. Don't take this as gospel, but I think like 18,000 people a year go missing, which is a crazy figure. So you're just dealing with huge spaces, small populations in these type of towns, in these outback environments, and stations. And then the third reason is me, the British backpacker who lost his arm in a horrific accident whilst, working on one of Australia's most remote cattle stations. So that's the type of place I was involved with for 3 full months. And
Yeah.
what was I doing? Well, it was working with about 15,000 cattle, branding, drafting, fighting bushfires. I had to pull snakes, pythons out of troughs that were out on the station.
Wow.
Bore runs, so that was making sure that all the water tanks around the whole station were full. That would be using big petrol pumps, diesel pumps that would pump water from deep within the ground and fill up and, feed all these cattle. Like 3 months I was there, and it was the hardest 3 months I've ever had in terms of the intensity of work, the type of work. It wasn't really for the faint-hearted. I'm not surprised I lasted all that time, but it was tough to last for a full 3 months.
Yeah.
And
Did
not
you
really,
enjoy it though while you were
yeah,
doing it?
I
Yeah.
did. I loved every minute and every day. So you have
Yeah.
to be ready to react to anything and everything. So, for example, the bushfires, you'd have storm through the night. The next day you'd wake up and you could smell smoke, and that's the worst smell you can smell out in a station, is the smell of smoke, because there's a huge kind of area that's on fire, and you now have to fight that for the next, could be 8 hours, it could be 12 hours, it could be a few days. We ended up fighting a bushfire for about 3 days straight, which was pretty tough. They bring food out to you whilst you're out there, and you're
Oh
going
my
to these
goodness.
troughs, filling up water, back burning, purposely burning land, which it didn't really make sense to me at the beginning, because I didn't really understand how the theory worked of back burning. But you burn fields to stop then this fire from jumping across to then, killing the other paddocks and cattle. Moving on to the next steps of my accident, it was the last week. Cattle work was complete, so we didn't have to do any more mustering, branding, drafting, all of that. That was all done. It was maintenance. So the biggest maintenance job at the station was fences and making sure that all your laneways, your gateways, your fence posts were all intact. So using this, example, the main bit of kit that we would use to fence post and, barbed wire all the way along for kilometres long would be the hydraulic post rammer, which is a bit of kit that attaches to the back of a tractor, and using the hydraulic system, a weight that weighs 185 kilograms would be raised up and released to hammer in 3-inch stainless steel posts. And this would be our gateways. And then you'd run hundreds of meters of barbed wire to the next post and then tighten it using a ratchet, and then that would be complete. And so we were set out. We had to create a lot more gateways, new paths. And during the last week, so this was a Wednesday morning, 2 days left of work, we were hammering some posts. I want to say about half an hour drive from the homestead. And I was working with one other guy who I'd worked with all season. And unfortunately, at the time where we just hammered in 2 posts, so I just wanted to measure the distance from the left to the right, which we knew had to be 3 meters exactly. And I measured it, and my arm was over the top of the post, or at least from what I remember. And I said to the guy driving, yeah, we're all good to go. The procedure of that would be drive forward, lift the back of the hydraulic post rammer up and drive forward. Now, when I heard the rev of this tractor, that's what I thought would happen, but actually the weight unfortunately came down, completely crushing my left arm over that post. So it was completely crushed between 185 kilogram weight and stainless steel post. So I saw my arm completely crushed, and I let off a horrific panic scream.
Yeah.
It's like a horror film scream. And
Yeah.
bearing in mind, we're 500 kilometres south of any medical hospital.
Oh my
So we're in
God.
Larimer, Darwin's the nearest hospital. And all I could think of was we just need to get to the town to call for help
Yeah.
or get back to the homestead. And so this next 20 minutes is probably the scariest 20 minutes of the whole situation. So I tied a tourniquet using an old t-shirt from the truck, the ute, we call them in Australia. And I took lead on that because my adrenaline just went through the roof. So I was fueled by adrenaline and I was focused and wired really for survival.
You're very
Um,
strong.
so I got my mate who was there. I said, you need to pull this as tight as you can. So he
Mm.
did. And I pulled it just above my elbow, which is where I could see kind of fresh skin in a way. I didn't know how low to go. And I thought if I can just go higher above the joint, then that's just going to stop any, reduced blood loss. Because that was my biggest worry, was losing blood.
Yeah.
And I think the adrenaline got me through to where we got to, because otherwise, I didn't pass out. I was alert and awake this whole time. So we bolted through every gate we could. It was, I can visualize it kind of second by second. And we're kind of shouting down the radio station, asking for the people at home, but there was no answer. And the reason why there was no answer is because this day, people weren't actually home. So we used our kind of initiative, bolted out onto the Stuart Highway to the pub, the Pink Panther pub in Larimer, and we just shouted for help. Now, we know the landlady and the landlord there. They were backpackers as well, European, had a little baby. So we used to go there on days off and drink beer.
Yeah.
And we screamed and shouted, and they didn't understand the severity of what was going on because they could just see our faces. They couldn't see my arm. And the second Jack came round to open that car door, their faces just hit panic mode as well and dropped, and they
Yeah.
jumped up, called the ambulance. And then an hour later, after it was called, the ambulance arrived. Straight away, they injected me with God knows what drugs.
Yeah.
But overall, it was 2 hours until the air ambulance arrived. So we had to then drive an hour to the next town to be picked up by the air ambulance. I got picked up by the air ambulance, and bearing in mind it's tropical season, so storms, lightning, thunder, windy. So we actually had to emergency land to refuel in the helicopter after an hour journey. And then we had the red light. We couldn't take off because of the storm. I don't know how long I was in that helicopter before we took off again, but I know we had a window of about, it was 10 minutes, and it was like go, go, go. It's like off an action film.
How you're explaining this to me, it makes me sound like this would be a movie. You've lived your own life movie. It's so scary.
It felt like it. It honestly felt like, when I look back, it is make a great film. But I think that's why I'm envisioning it is, it was very adrenaline fueled, action packed, scary. Like the emotions going through what I was feeling at the time was extremely scary. But we had a 20-minute window where, when you say now we've got 20 minutes or if that, and the helicopter, I could just hear the revs go up, helicopter getting louder, and we're taking off. But at that point, helicopter's doing this, and it's, I'm strapped down to a stretcher. And at this point, I get injected with about 4 mil of pure ketamine. Because in Australia, that's the drug, that's the go-to drug for pain. And it was just like chaos. And I was kicking and screaming, trying to get out, and I don't know why, because I was like, what's going on? I was screaming to the guys, what's going on? And they couldn't hear me because I didn't have the earpiece and mic. I could see them saying, just calm down, it's fine. And that's getting up over those clouds. And then after, it's like a scene off a film. We got over the clouds, and then it was just peace, because we'd beat the cloud, we got higher than the storm, and I could then see the sunset across the Outback Australia coming into Darwin. So, lots of emotion going through that journey. One thing I will highlight is that I actually did ring my parents on that helicopter flight before I was injected with ketamine, because I don't think I could have a conversation after that. So I rang them to say, look, Mum, Dad, I've told them I've broken my arm. Rebecca, I said to my mum and dad, I said, I think I broke my arm. And then a week later, I saw the doctor on board, and she said, I heard you say you broke your arm to your parents. And she said, that's the biggest understatement of the century, that was. And I said, yeah, but I couldn't face the fact telling them that this could have happened, what the outcome could be.
Sweet.
So I also rang Becca as well and hung up quickly on FaceTime because I didn't want her to see. She was thinking, well,
Yeah.
what's happened? What have you done? But then I called her and explained. So those were two really difficult conversations to have. But overall, it was 8 hours later. I landed in Darwin Hospital. I went into theatre and I woke up the next day with my arm amputated.
How did you feel when you woke up? Did you kind of know whilst going through that awful time that you were going to lose your arm, or was it a shock? Or
I knew when it
yeah,
happened. I said to Jack, my mate who I was working with, in that journey from when the site of the injury to the pub, I said, I'm going to lose my arm here, like in tears. He said, no, you'll be fine. And he was driving as fast as he could and, holding his left arm on my shoulder and trying to comfort me that way. But I knew because the sight of it was crushed, completely crushed. And there's no way the top surgeons in the world could have saved an arm. And I'm glad it was amputated because now I'm in the world of amputees. If they would have saved my arm at the condition it was, I would have had limited function, limited mobility, and it probably would have been more of a struggle to live with a unusable arm. And I probably then would have gone through a process of voluntary amputation, which is what they call it. 3 years, 4 years down the line, I know a lot of people who have done that. Now, annoyingly, I think surgeons have to do what they can to save an arm, even though it might be better for you just to amputate.
yeah,
But I've started with a clean slate with my amputation. I've gone from one extreme to another. And within the 2 years of rehab, I've hammered it. So, I've got good range of motion in my elbow, and it's just about dealing with the other areas, which I'll go into.
yeah.
Um,
And if you'd had that other arm, it would have been a constant reminder as well, looking at it, and you wouldn't be able to do so many things, and that would probably bring you down even more as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, and it's hard to say what it could have been like, I think, if that
Yeah,
was the case. But just speaking to other amputees, I know people on waiting lists for voluntary amputations, and they said, I wish it was amputated at the time of my injury. It was not as bad to amputate, but it still wasn't good enough right now to save it, to get the function back. So in a way, the fact it was such an extreme injury led to an amputation is actually, ironically, the better outcome than if it was less of an injury and they would have kept the arm.
yeah,
But again, you cannot specifically compare the two different scenarios because you have to deal with, as an amputee, your current situation and what you're
absolutely.
facing, you have to focus on. You can't be thinking, oh, what if that happened? But in this situation, you look at the mechanism of that post-trauma, it could have easily been a different outcome. I look at from a bird's eye view, probably 2 inches from my head. So you've got to look at it like that and think, well, I've survived this, and we've got to now get on with life and never get back
Yeah,
to normal, but
yeah.
see
So
opportunities.
what happened after, obviously, did you have to stay in hospital in Australia for a long time, or were you able to come home? How did your recovery process start, being so far away from family and Becca
Yeah.
again?
So I was in hospital for 2 weeks. Pretty much an amputation when done like that, it's actually quite a quick turnaround to kind of get you in and get you out. I didn't want to leave hospital because I felt safe in this bubble of I had psychological support, all the plastic surgeons, the doctors, the nurses. I had a few issues. I had lymphatic drainage issues. So my left-hand side was completely swollen, even all the way up to my left pec and shoulder, bicep. I think that's just the body's way of healing. Going
Yeah,
through all the trauma, just the amount of fluid that my body was releasing. So for those amputees who are listening, I was connected to a vac machine, which essentially is a machine that kind of sucked onto my residual limb and absorbed all the moisture that my body was producing to protect. I had that for about 2.5 weeks, and the amount of liquid that was coming out of me was ridiculous. Me and my dad, we called it elbow juice because it looked like honeycomb in a little bag coming out.
so
And the
that's good
same,
stuff, isn't it? That's healing stuff
I would say
within your body.
yes,
Yeah,
but the body didn't know where to put it. So that's why this vac machine controlled the amount of fluid.
okay.
Because really, I didn't have a sealed arm at this point. My skin graft it was so raw. So fluid could escape, and so it couldn't be withheld within the residual limb. So that's why these vac machines are created, to just bring out this excess fluid.
Yeah.
But I remember
Yeah.
it wasn't sealed correctly. So first 2 nights of hospital were awful because I would wake up in the middle of the night and my bed sheet would be covered in, it was that liquid plus blood. So it looked a lot worse than it probably was. But I
Yeah.
said to the doctors and the nurse, I said, guys, this is leaking. And I could see a bit of, this was at 2 a.m. The nurses were like, oh God, this isn't good because it should be completely sealed.
Yeah.
And there's been a bit of teething issues with my vacuum machine for the first 2 nights. And I'd wake up in the night and it'd be wet because of, again, my arm was above my heart to help with the draining, and it was not collecting in that vacuum machine. So it was just emptying out onto the bed. So that wasn't a great 2 days. But after that, it was all sorted. They sealed it back up. But overall, 2 weeks in the hospital, 1 week in a hotel, got my fit to fly, and I flew home on the 9th of December.
Did your family fly over to Australia to be with you?
Only my dad flew out. I think that was a big decision on who was to fly out. Now, the skin graft surgery was actually scarier than the first initial surgery I felt, because they told me that my elbow had been saved, which is a blessing, really. You know, if you can save as much of that limb as possible, that does give you more independence. Now, I was really concerned that I didn't know where they had it amputated from, even though, you know, I woke up and I could see my arm, because there was so much dressing on there. I didn't know if I was above the elbow, below the elbow. And the skin graft surgery, they said, look, when we unravel this, if it's not healthy tissue, then we will have to amputate further. And I was just so scared for that. So it was a roller coaster of emotion. Luckily, because that tourniquet was tied on so quickly after that injury, that saved further blood loss and saved any other tissue from really dying. And so then they would have had to take it up. So that was, you know, really the outcome. That tourniquet saved what I have left of my amputated arm.
Did you have any medical training to know how to do that to your arm straight after the accident, or did you see it happen in movies and TV shows and things like that, don't you? Because that was a quick act on your behalf, you know, whilst being in that situation must have been so scary.
Yeah, I
I
think
wouldn't know what to do. I'd panic. I'd be a mess.
it's really interesting, because you're not the first to say I would have just panicked, but it's amazing what the body goes through in sounds like extreme, but like a life and death situation when you're faced with certain scenarios, how your body reacts to pressure. I think when you include adrenaline, that fight or flight response kicks in, and honestly, you just don't know how you'll react. But my previous education is in sports injuries and rehab, so I have that base level of first aid. Now, this is obviously way past what we look at in terms of first aid, but it was more of an instinctive action.
Yeah.
It was like, stop the blood, because it was so important to stop the blood, and I just could find anything, an old rag, it was a t-shirt, we ripped in half and just bang, tied it as tight as possible. And that just saved us time, it saved us blood loss, and it then led to the
I would
outcome.
imagine that saved your life and your elbow acting that
Yeah.
quickly in that situation.
In a way, yeah, because again, with the blood loss, yeah, I know. I didn't pass out. I still can't believe I didn't, really, based on the situation. But adrenaline fueled, we got the help we needed, and we got to hospital. And yeah, the outcome was the amputation. So
how, obviously, you came back home, how are you feeling like now on your rehab? Because it's still quite early for you. It's only a few years ago, isn't it?
yeah, this is about 26, 27 months now post amputation, so just over 2 years. I think the hardest part was coming home. So in Australia, I was in a safety net bubble. You know, you've got all that care, like I said, it's all there. And that's not the real world. It was when I left Australia and I got back to England, and I'm back in my room and I'm back to my old routine habits, where now things are different. You know, getting changed is different, cleaning myself is different, making my bed is different. So all these things are now different after Australia. Peak year of my life, coming back in the dark days of January, February and March. It was a really tough time in those first few months, really tough. You know, I think Christmas helped. I was seeing family. That just kind of brushed under any emotions I was feeling, really, with how I was actually feeling. Yes, it was great to see family. Yes, it was great to see friends, but deep down, and I knew I had to do something about it, really. I had to hit the ground running with recovery to help, mental recovery and physical recovery.
Yeah.
So pretty much.
What did you, yeah, what did you, do you feel that you struggled more with the mental side of everything? Like dealing, I can't imagine being involved in an accident like that, but I'm sure it must be things that give you nightmares. Getting over that must be really, really tough.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you said it there, like with the PTSD symptoms for
Yeah.
me were the bad dreams and kind of the flashbacks. Those are the two main things. And if we focus on like bad dreams, for example, they would happen if I was in a different environment or I wasn't settled. So, and the way the trauma kind of worked in my head was that those bad dreams were actually accidents happening to like close friends and family, not me. So it was really interesting how it wasn't actually about the station or it wasn't about the farm work. It was about, people who are close to me having similar like injuries, which
Wow.
really interesting. Still have psychotherapy, but that's
Yeah.
just the way how your brain can deal with trauma, and it's different for many different people. Um, and so I had to decide or had to make action on reducing the chances of these bad things from happening. So I live on a farm. We're not farmers through and through, but we live out in the Gloucestershire countryside. So I used to go out and do like little bits of running because I had to limit any risk of falling. But then I would have triggered flashbacks through when I walk past a farm or run past a farm. I could smell then like the cattle were in the paddocks and I could smell it. And that's like the exact same smell I smelt in Australia. So it was just managing those flashbacks and PTSD symptoms as best as I possibly could.
Yeah.
So moving like, on the same kind of topic, ice baths, which was my big focus in the January, February, really in the first quarter, if not first 6 months of my recovery.
How did you hear about ice bath therapy? Was it something that you'd always known about, or did you hear that this might help you with your PTSD?
So I'd researched and I've read Wim Hof's book. Me and my mate at
Yeah.
uni, he recommended his books to me and his work. So I started looking at it. And I just thought people use this to channel traumas, energy, distractions into this type of activity. So I'm going to try it. And my auntie and uncle bought me an ice bath at Christmas. And so then that was my challenge. It was, so I couldn't play rugby anymore. I'm an ex-rugby player. I couldn't go to the gym at this moment in time, in that early stage. So I had a challenge of doing ice bath, and then it became a habit that led to kind of,
Yeah.
I have to do this now. And that really helped the kind of discipline around progressing with rehab and then other areas of life. Until you try it, it's hard to explain to people the benefits. But
Yeah.
I was then sleeping better because of my ice baths. I set myself a challenge last Feb to do an ice bath a day for February, just again to kind of look back on the previous February and how far I've come as well.
Yeah, that's
Um,
great. Are you
but
going to do it? Have you done it this year?
yeah,
Or
I have been. I've got my Lumi ice bath in the back garden. I just use outdoor temperature water. I don't have any of the fancy regulators of the cooling
yeah,
system with it, because again, they are how expensive for what they are. Um, and then if I get a chance, if I'm up near the coast down south and it's in the winter, I'm getting in. So that's kind of
yeah,
my
go in the
rule.
water.
And I still do ice baths to this day. Maybe not every day, but at least I'm doing one once or twice a week. And if not, I want to maximize it now in the winter.
Yeah. So you're now a adaptive CrossFit athlete. Do you think, being a rugby player before your accident, that as you were always very interested in sport, do you think this helped you with did you know always, like, even though I've gone through all this tragic accident and I've lost my arm, I'm going to get back out there and find out what I can do as an athlete moving forward?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
there was a drive inside of me that I had to see what I was still capable of, and actually still getting on with life and enjoying life. Now people say, why don't you go back to play rugby? Now risking reward. If I fall over, get tackled, and I put my right arm out and I break it, how am I going to live independently? Now, I started my rehab in a CrossFit gym because that was the most accessible gym in my area. And for those of you who haven't participated in CrossFit or know what CrossFit is, it's probably one of the best things, low barriers to entry. You can change, you can adapt, you can modify every exercise to make sure anybody with any disability, any demographic, any age can complete that movement. And so I just walked in and I said to this guy, who is now my coach, said, "Have you ever worked with an amputee?" He was like, "No." And he said, "But it's no different. We can modify, we can change, and you're going to start progressing." And that was the start of really the next 18 months. Really, that's happened with my CrossFit progressions and training. So rest is history.
It's amazing how we can adapt and overcome and rise above any kind of situations that we have in front of us. It's really remarkable.
It is. And I think until you're in that situation, you find ways to do so. It's hard to say, or like, I can't compare being a lower limb amputee, you can't compare being an upper. But until people face certain situations, that is when you really see kind of the light coming through and people do adapt.
Yeah.
But it does come down to mindset, especially, what are you like as an individual right now? I talk a lot about discipline and resilience in my talks. It does help if you are a person who is up for a challenge before. If you're building your resilience, what are you doing and how are you doing it? Don't expect a miracle when you're faced with a difficult time that you're going to be okay about it. I kind of give the analogy of you train a muscle to get stronger, you've got to train your mindset to be stronger as well. So what are you doing to your mindset now? And the ice bath for me was one. And look how that's just accelerated my progressions. People might think, really, just from an ice bath, but it's the principle of what that gives me. The start of the domino effect of then further training. It was the foundations that I had to build in the early days to then stabilize myself to then go. So, that's key.
Yeah, giving you the strength and determination that you can achieve like amazing things as well. It's really cool. It's been really interesting talking to you. Like for me, I was born with limb difference, so I have not been through a traumatic accident, and I speak to so many other amputees or people with, disabilities about their traumatic accidents. And I think, I just can't imagine like how you all get through that. So like, I find that really admirable. My biggest challenge for me growing up was there was no social media and I was like the only disabled kid at school. So I always felt very, very different and isolated. And so I kind of dealt with that internally. But I only just recently sort of accepted my limb difference, probably about 5 years ago when I started social media. And I started to see lots of other people out there like me, and that I wasn't the only one. And also my work for Limb Power charity, meeting other people with limb loss. But how was your journey through self-acceptance? Because for me, like I'm 44 now, so that's taken me like 40 years, 39 years to accept my limb loss. How did you find that? Did you accept it quite quickly?
I think it was difficult to accept. And again, I don't know if there's like you wake up and say, "Oh, I accept it now." I don't think it's as black and white as that. I think it's hard for me to see what life was like before, how people treated you before and post injury, post amputation. So seeing someone now as previously an able-bodied, post disabled individual. So it's really interesting because eyes do wander. And I think when I meet people for the first time, there's a quick glance, and I've never experienced that before. But again, it's just because people aren't staring to be rude, and this is my take on it. People are staring, or at least glancing, because they're just a little bit inquisitive around, or haven't seen that. That doesn't, it's not what I usually see. So instead of thinking everyone's staring at you because they're being rude, in my head, it wasn't that. And that helps a little bit with the whole mindset approach. Self-acceptance, it's a really tricky one.
Mm,
But
it's so tough.
as you said, the social media benefits of reaching out to other amputees has massively accelerated probably that self-acceptance area. I didn't know one amputee in hospital. So I woke up after my year, after my accident, and I didn't know an amputee. Yes, you see the Paralympics, fine, you know a few, but I mean, in my life, do I know of somebody? And I didn't know anybody. So I kind of felt extremely victimized, dangerous place to
Yeah.
be. So I thought, again, things have to change. So I started reaching out I went on Instagram and hashtag amputee, upper limb,
Okay.
specifically uppers,
Yeah.
because again, there's lots of lower limb amputees. 10% of amputees are upper limb out of 90%. And I think 4 to 6% are trauma. So it's still quite small numbers. And again, I started seeing these athletes or these amputees in Spain, America,
Yeah.
and the focus of my amputee that I wanted to meet was sporty, around the sport focus, whether they're athletics, CrossFit, or whatever sport. I chose those pictures based on if they were sporty or not, and I chose those people, and then
Yeah.
I created a little bit of a network around people who I kind of wanted to aspire to be like based on what their socials say. And that's really how I really started then progressing with the CrossFit, because the guys I reached out to were CrossFit athletes,
Yeah.
adaptive CrossFit athletes, and they were lifting weights, they were climbing ropes, they were bar muscle up in and all of this. And I was thinking, well, if they can do it with one arm, like exactly the same that I've got, then that creates a visual image for me in the future.
You can do it.
That really helps. So that is so important, I think, has helped with the self-acceptance, is using social media in a positive way to connect with other
It's
people.
powerful, isn't it? And you feel very much part of the community and also an incredible community as well. I often see so many people out there doing such wonderful, extraordinary, amazing things, and it helps motivate and inspire me as well that, wow, if they can do it, then we can do it too. And I think that's really great.
Definitely. And I think sky's the limit with it. Now in
Yeah.
the gym, I've been training CrossFit for 18 months. I can climb ropes, I can do bar muscle ups and all of this. Yeah, I'm the adaptive athlete. There are people there who can't do those type of things. Now, I know that's a bit more of the extreme side of things,
Yeah.
but it's still people think, oh, like in a new gym setting, well, how's he going to do that? And then I pull my strap out and I do whatever. And they look at it and go, I didn't think you'd be able to do that. So I think it's
Yeah.
proving people wrong as well, but also it's educating people and understanding terms and kind of how to actually talk to someone as an amputee. It's the exact same. It's no
Yeah.
diff. Yeah, people
I
seem to think,
absolutely love that.
yeah, well, I'm still a person, so it doesn't make any difference.
It's
Um,
still me. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh my God, that is so true.
people are
So
scared
I
of
leave
saying the
a
wrong thing, aren't they?
pardon.
People are scared of saying the wrong thing, but
I know. And then they get all awkward and
yeah,
flustered, and then it becomes really uncomfortable when you're thinking, oh, what are you?
yeah,
It's fine.
yeah.
Don't
And I
worry
think it's
about
sad
it.
if people think that, that's quite sad, because then they're stopping that potential conversation from happening. They're
Yeah,
hiding away from
exactly.
that, and eventually, and throughout the rest of their lives, they're going to be hiding from those type of conversations. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's yeah,
Oh, well, our final question, and this is all basically just an inspirational message out there to any other people within our limb loss community who maybe, have an amputation booked, or they're also dealing with a traumatic accident that's resulted in amputation. What advice can you give to those guys out there to help them along on their journey and see the positive outlook of amputation?
yeah. I think for those who have experienced an amputation recently, or even if it was years ago, but initially is to focus on the things that are going to help you, not harm you. So in my situation, I focused on short-term goals that were accessible. So like an ice bath, like reaching out to other amputees. That then led to further on down the line, things that are going to help me. Well, actually, I need to start competing again. I need to start getting into training, not sitting at home, not feeling sorry for myself. And if we can maximize the things that are going to help you, they're going to then minimize the things that are going to harm you. And especially with an amputation, you might have traumas associated with, your PTSD symptoms, flashbacks, nightmares, high levels of anxieties. Well, if I doom scroll for an hour, is that going to help or harm me? It's probably going to harm you. If I drink alcohol, is that going to help me sleep better? No, it's going to probably make it worse. So minimize the harming and maximize the helping. And then that principle just applies in everyone's life, whether, what goals you've got with work, family. See it as simply as that and start ticking away the helping kind of subcategories. That is my simple bit of advice. And then my other bit of advice, which is a bit more extreme, for a bit more maybe like post-rehab, you've done all of the helping harming, you've maximized that, but it's get comfortable being uncomfortable. And that principle comes, I see it in my life in two areas. Previously to my accident, going on a station, extreme environments, new setting, completely out of my comfort zone, I started to get comfortable being uncomfortable in that situation. And that helped me build my resilience. And then post-accident, I'm a public speaker and I talk in front of huge audiences, which 4 years ago, even 2 years ago, I couldn't think of anything worse. Same principle. It's getting comfortable being uncomfortable in those situations. So apply it in different areas of your life, because it's amazing what can be achieved when you do those two things. So that's what I'm going to leave you with today.
That is the best advice ever. Honestly, I absolutely agree with all of that, Henry. Thank you so much for joining us for today. And
really
I just want to, and thank everybody for joining us too. And we will see you all again next time.
Amazing. And just quickly before we finish, out my Instagram page, or Henry Dunn _ you'll see it. I want to talk now a lot more about prosthetics, adaptive training. So if those are interested, give me a follow. And those who are interested in a keynote presentation, Life in My Own Hand is the name of my keynote presentation. So there's a website as well, and get in contact if you would like me.